By far the worst One Piece related project ever is the 4Kids dub, and there have been some bad One Piece items produced and sold. Look at this figure for example. So the 4Kids dub having this title is definitely not a good thing, and if you are a pretty new One Piece fan, or even if you started watching 10 years ago, you still might not know what the 4Kids dub is. So let me explain really quickly. The One Piece 4Kids dub is not the normal dub of One Piece. The One Piece dub is actually pretty good. You'll always have the sub versus dub debate, but overall, Toei Animation and Funimation do a good job with the dub of One Piece. The 4Kids dub is a completely different dubbed version of the show, and hence the name. It was produced and marketed to promote the show to children. Apparently, they wanted to increase their audience, so they made a kid-friendly version of One Piece. And since One Piece features a lot of cruel things, slavery, kidnapping, murder, pedophilia, cannibalism, etc., it doesn't take a genius to realize that this might not have been the best idea. In order to make this happen, a lot of stuff was going to need to be changed or censored, but somehow it still got the stamp of approval, and from 2004 to 2007, they produced 143 episodes of this abomination. So that's what this video is about. We're going to go over the worst changes and censorship that they made, and overall go over why it was a terrible idea from start to finish. The first change we're going to talk about is Zoro. In the 4Kids dub, Zoro was not Zoro. They changed his name to Zolo. Now, they didn't change this on purpose. At first, I thought they did, and then I did some research and I found out two reasons why his name was Zolo in the 4Kids dub. The first reason is pretty simple. It's just a translation issue between Japanese and English. In Japanese, Lo and Ro, L-O and R-O, are pronounced almost identically, so there can easily be a mistranslation. But if it was just a mistranslation, they would have changed his name back to Zoro, right? So the second reason is why they kept his name as Zolo. That reason being that they were afraid of copyright issues. There are old American movies based around a fictional character named Zoro with 2 R's, so they were afraid they would get copyrighted for using the name Zoro. It's not just one movie either. There is a whole collection of these movies. You got the original Zoro, the Mask of Zoro, the Mark of Zoro, Zoro and the Three Musketeers, Zoro the Avenger, and there's a lot more than that. We're barely scratching the surface of these old Zoro films. Ask your grandpa about these films or something because they made a lot of them. So after learning this information, it becomes a lot more clear why they would make the decision to change Zoro's name to Zolo. Obviously, this issue must have gotten cleared up because in the actual English dub, he is Zoro, not Zolo, but in the 4Kids dub, he was Zolo. So moving on to another big change in the show, the weapons. One Piece is a show full of weapons. Every pirate and marine is most likely holding a gun, sword, knife, axe, and those aren't really considered kid-friendly, so they had to do something about them. The two main fixes they decided on were turning the guns into toy guns or just completely removing them altogether. In the 4Kids show, guns look different in different episodes. Some episodes, they look like old toy Nerf guns that are like blue with orange tips, as we see here. Then in other episodes, they're completely green like we see little toy soldiers carry. So it's pretty clear that they were doing everything they could to make these guns look as fake as possible to the little kids watching. However, they were a bit more lenient with the swords. Some of the swords were real and some of the swords were fake. All of Zolo's swords were real the entire time while other things weren't real. For example, in Arlong Park, Nami whispers to Usopp that her knife is rubber before stabbing him in front of Arlong. Or when Helmeppo holds up a gun to Kobe's head at the beginning of the manga and anime, that's changed to this weird looking axe contraption in the 4Kids dub. Another big change we see is when Arlong kills Bellamere in the flashback. In the anime, he shoots her with a pistol, but in the 4Kids dub, they changed the story completely. Instead of the gun pointing at her like he's doing right here, it's just his finger pointing at her, and he says he's gonna toss her in a dungeon. So in the 4Kids dub of One Piece, they did not kill Bellamere like in the actual story, and theoretically, she was still alive when Luffy defeated Arlong. This is the type of stuff that they had to change to keep it censored for kids. To end off this section on weapons, a lot of the fight scenes in the 4Kids dub are trimmed down and condensed, showing less violence to the children watching. And the small scenes that did make it in would never show any injuries. For example, if Zoro slashed someone with his swords, there would be no blood, cut marks, or anything at all. It would just be them screaming. Here are some examples on the screen right now. In conclusion, to make One Piece kid-friendly, they had to change the weapons, how they looked, their effects when used on people, and because of that, big aspects of the story were changed overall. One of the biggest changes 4Kids decided to make is right when the Straw Hats enter the Grand Line. In the manga and anime, there's a little mini arc here where they meet Laboon, the whale. In the 4Kids dub, the Straw Hats enter the Grand Line and Laboon is nowhere to be seen. Instead, there is an iceberg in their way. Laboon got completely cut out of the 4Kids dub. He wasn't mentioned a single time. That also means no Crocus, a former member of Roger's crew who is really important for the Straw Hats to meet and build the story. Instead, it's just an iceberg and Luffy shoots it and destroys it with a cannon. I think there are two reasons why they completely cut this out. The first being budget cuts. Maybe they had a limited budget with what they could animate, so they decided to cut Laboon out. But the other reason I think is the real reason. Once again, this is a show made for kids. So thinking back on Laboon's appearance, he might not be the most kid-friendly whale. His face is covered in scars and blood. His backstory is about him ramming his head into the red line over and over, so Crocus had to give him medicine every day. So the decision to remove Laboon does make a little bit of sense. They probably didn't want to show a lot of animal violence to kids. That means their options were either changing Laboon's story altogether or completely removing him, which they did. Next up, we're going to briefly cover the dialogue and jokes in the 4Kids dub. Like almost everything else in One Piece, the dialogue isn't kid-friendly, so they changed a lot of it, and it's not good. Starting with the voice actors, you can tell the era of TV that this was made just by the way they talk. It's really hard to explain, but just listen to it.
Eat this!
Drink up! The water's good here!
The food's not bad either, though it is a little on the salty side.
So those are some of the voice actors you're working with. Then pair them with some horrible dialogue, and you get a disaster. Ignoring all other changes to the story like the weapons, Zoro's name, removing Laboon, if you just look at the dialogue by itself, the show is still horrific. I've been dogging it a lot, so now I'm gonna prove it to you by showing you how weird some of this is. The first one I'll show you is a tiny snippet from Zoro vs. Mr. One.
Your attitude's the pits.
Cherry, peach, or apricot?
I get the joke, but it's just not funny. Next up, we got a little conversation between Zolo and Sanji.
It's ungentlemanly to raise a hand against a lady.
Sanji, if you know what's good for you, just keep sucking your candy!
Next up is a line from Nico Robin that just doesn't make any sense.
I'm gonna take the little princess back to the castle and give her sugar and spice and everything nice.
I don't even know what to say anymore. Like, why did she say that? The next clip is Nami vs. Miss Doublefinger, and this one makes me physically cringe.
I blow this, and it's over. It's a twister, sister!
Okay, I'm gonna share one more clip with you. This one isn't about the bad dialogue as much, but does show another change that they made in the show.
Don't get your beak tweaked out of shape, little birdie.
You ate a cursed fruit! Which one?
Instead of calling devil fruits, they changed the name to make it less religious. So devil fruits were changed to cursed fruits. Next up, we're going to talk about Sanji's character as a whole. First off, he no longer smokes cigarettes in the 4Kids version. Instead, they gave him a lollipop, and they make it very clear that it is a lollipop. They go out of their way to make sure it's stated multiple times. Honestly, this change isn't that bad. There's nothing inherently wrong with Sanji having a lollipop instead of a cigarette. The only issues they would have is some scenes later on in Skypiea against NL, or the bingo moment in Water 7, because I feel like the cigarette makes those moments a lot better, but overall the lollipop wasn't a crazy change. It makes sense. But what makes Sanji unbearable in the 4Kids dub is his voice actor. I don't know who in their right mind thought it was a good idea to cast this person as Sanji's voice, and I'm sorry if you are somehow watching this video and you were the person that voiced Sanji, but they set you up for failure, man. I don't blame you. I don't blame the voice actor. I blame whoever casted you as Sanji's voice actor. They should have been fired immediately after that. Every time I see a 4Kids dub clip and Sanji's voice is in it, I physically recoil. It's that atrociously bad. But like I said earlier, it kind of makes sense for the era this was produced.
Oh love, smile on me, for I cannot endure such suffering, such sweet sorrow. Yes, I would stoop to becoming a pirate or even a demon if only I could be with you, my dearest Petunia.
In like 90s and early 2000s cartoons, you would hear voices similar to this guy, but there's a reason they're not around anymore. They weren't good. But lastly, I'm going to talk about how they ended the show, because like I mentioned 1,000 times already, this was a kids show, and the way they ended it is pretty weird to show to a bunch of kids. At the start of the video, I mentioned the 4Kids dub ended after 143 episodes. So that is just after Alabasta, and the episode 143, is the Straw Hats on the Going Merry in the ocean on the way to Jaya. In this episode, a huge ship falls from the sky. In the manga and anime, this is how they find out about Skypiea. They go scuba diving and find the map of the island, and Luffy gets all hyped. But in the 4Kids dub, the show ends with the ship still in the air above the Going Merry. It just cuts off right there. So they end the 4Kids show by making the viewers think the Straw Hats die from this ship falling on top of them. I mean, what else are people gonna assume when you cut off a show like that? People always assume the worst. Those were some of the biggest changes that 4Kids made to One Piece. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to drop a like and check out my recent video where I talk about One Piece theories.